Wonderful. Good afternoon, everybody. Just hated interrupting. That music sounded so good. My name is Julie Gishuru. I'm an Afro optimist and a passionate African. Happy to be with you. I see Live Studio is there. Over to you, and I'm in your hands.
Good. All right. Well, good morning and good afternoon to everyone, wherever you're. I thought I was sorry about that. Good morning and good afternoon to everyone, wherever you're joining us from. This is a conversation on what the pandemic has taught us about the changing nature of imagined communities and building resilience. Now, before we dive into our conversation, I've been having some thoughts around imagined communities and identity. And naturally, whenever I travel, one question I often get asked is, where is home, right? And I think everyone in this room does get asked the same question, where is home? And by virtue of this document here, this is a passport from Zambia. By default, home, the identity I'm given is that, I'm Zambian or I come from Zambia. And I've been thinking a lot about this, and the truth is, for me, that home is wherever I feel comfortable or wherever I've built community. And Uganda is one such country. I've been here for over 10 times. I've traveled here. I've built an amazing community of friends who've become family to me. And in fact, my friends here like to joke that whenever we head out, I'm introducing my Ugandan friends to other Ugandans. So that's how much at home I am here. And I say all this because for me, I feel like my identity is a mix of being a global citizen as well as being a very, very proud Zambian. And I think at no time has this become more apparent than in the pandemic, because in the pandemic, for one, we couldn't congregate. And in my country, Zambia, we just went through an election where we congregated online, had conversations online, held our government accountable, and we ushered in a new government that we're so proud of. And so never have I been so proudly Zambian. And in the same, in the same space, I've also never been more aware of my identity as a global citizen in the midst of a pandemic, just thinking about how we were all affected by the virus. It didn't matter where on the continent you were, where on the world you were. It didn't matter what language you speak. It doesn't matter, what kind of access to healthcare you have. If it was the best in the world or you had no access to healthcare, you felt the loss, you felt the grief, you felt the fear. And, now as the world is opening up, you're feeling the hope of what can be as we are built into whatever, this becomes. So I'm really excited to have this conversation with an esteemed panel, who are going to help us really dissect this topic, what the pandemic has taught us about the changing nature of imagined communities and building resilience. So without much further ado, let me introduce our panel. Joining us virtually all the way from Nairobi, Kenya, I believe, is Julie Gichuru. Dr. Prosper, or Prosper. Has the concept of, community, whether that's the people you serve, whether that's clients, patients, has that shifted in the pandemic? Oh, you don't have a mic.
Thank you. I think I belong to quite very many communities. I put on several hats. The first, I'm a medical doctor. I'm also part of the community of the Law Africa Institute, but also run an organization called MScan that does portable ultrasound machines for pregnant mothers. So I'm also in the startup space as a leader and also an active player. When COVID came, I personally was already working with my startup, but then I saw the opportunity to serve on the front line. So I was among those people who said, this is fire coming, but a part of me said, I need to be part of this. I need to rise up to the occasion. So I applied and got in as a frontline health worker. I've been working at one of the regional referral hospitals in Uganda. And I can say for the last 1.5 years that I've been there, it has been amazing. It has been being part of that community of people, of health workers, has transformed my life. I've grown as a healthcare professional, but also I have had the fulfillment of saying I've been part of the action. I could say that I'll give an example. I'll just base from healthcare professionals. I think all of us were aware of what it took to actually the burnout that health workers were facing on the front line, the stretch, the extra load that we had because of a new disease. And as health workers, I have to be honest, we're building the science around COVID-19. It's only that we had things like innovation that were able to get a vaccine within a space of about 11 months, that were able to come to the head of the curve of COVID-19. So the community that I belong to had to really, look into previous experiences. For example, working with Ebola, managing Ebola in Uganda, the HIV scourge that we've had for since I think the first case was 1994, around there, or before. So we've had to tap into our bank of experience to inform our resilience on the front line. And I think for me, I was glad that I was able to tap into that and be able to serve. But there's nothing more as personal as being the personal experience. I think for me is what I think should inform our resilience. Even as much as we talk about it's a community, it's still made up of individuals who have to each pull together and contribute to the broader objective. Okay, so I had to. I remember when I was the first 3 months, I was not allowed to visit family, be home. I had to really use technology to keep up with family, to keep that sense of community away from the health workers that were there. So I had to keep fit. I had to do some jogging to just be in the best position. But as health workers, the ministry was very intentional and set up mental health experts that were designated for health workers, because this was a very stressful time for health workers. So I would say that the sense of community is something that we should cherish, but we shouldn't forget that the communities are made up of members, individual members who are also human. I love when Hashim was ending, he said in the previous conversation, we are all human. And we have to, first of all, build individual resilience so that we can have a community, we can have a stronger and more sustainable community resilience.
All right, thank you. So the need to feel, we have an innate desire to connect, to engage, to be seen and to be heard, regardless, pre-pandemic. So thank you. Linda, now you work with young people in terms of helping small business startups. Maybe tell us a little bit about what it is that you do in your field, but also we're curious to learn the way you see your community, if I would put it that way, you know, the people, the startups you're helping, the youth. How's that changed? Do you still see them the same way, or has that concept of that community changed?
Thank you. Perhaps I should reintroduce myself to everybody
Please
because
do.
I wasn't supposed to be on this panel today. My name is Linda, and I'm a lawyer by profession. I'm also a businesswoman, but more than the two, I'm also a dreamer. Like many of you in this room, I love to start things and to be part of the imagined communities that we've been speaking about. And so what I do with the Future Generations Trust, which I just actually started, formalized, I have been doing this work for a long time, but I formalized it after the pandemic hit because, again, the pandemic showed me that money and you know, investing and all that was just secondary. People were dropping dead, and we saw a lot of equalizing happening around everybody in the, you know, around the globe. In America, people were dying, you know, every day, and you were like, what's happening? And in Kampala, people were not dying, and then they were saying, oh, third world, what's happening here? Why aren't you dying? You know, there was a lot of things going on, but it equalized altogether, and it made me think the things that I do and the things that I love that I do on the side should actually matter. I mean, they matter to me, but then I should put them on to the forefront because that's who I am. And so the pandemic made me think about legacy and the things that I love and passion. And why am I doing the other things if I can't put to the forefront the things that I love? And I need to speak about him. He's been pushing me, you know, put your things that you love to the forefront. But it was all because of the pandemic. And so what I do with the Future Generations Fund or Trust is that I feel that as Ugandans and as Africans, we don't talk about helping each other often. We leave it to the donors, and you know, you hear about all these Europeans and then all these other people doing things and bringing money here. But when we make our own money, we take it back to our families and to our villages and, you know, the extended families that we have, and also our communities around the people we work with. But we don't actually document these things, or where I come from, we don't document them. We just do them because it's duty. And so what I found was that all the work that I've been doing before with very many different people I've seen in this room that I've worked with and I still do work with, is that we were suffering together. And this time things were just going crazy, but we're not gathering each other. And so what the pandemic has done is that it has gathered us, and we were like, you know what's going on and what can we do? And people were really in bad places, and people who were looking after orphans were not doing it anymore because they themselves were being orphaned by not having jobs, and there was no money. And so I just had to create a community around the people that I work with and say, this is what I have. Some of my businesses closed, and it was a reality. Things were changing, and I'm like, listen, the money that we share normally, I no longer have. And so we had to reimagine how we were working. And I thought, why not formalize it and also say, hey, Ugandans, I do this, come join me. And so I've had so many, actually the pandemic has been in a way, a very telling thing, because now I can have conversation with my friends and say, listen, bring that money that you make outside, share it here. I have people I work with and they need it. And they've been generous, and people have given me their time, and, you know, we're working together. And so what we have learned, I forget, I'm veering off, but what we have learned during this time with the community that I work with, which is across Uganda, is that we ourselves can do this. We don't need outsiders more than we need ourselves, and we can work together to actually change the spaces we live in. And we have been more alive to other issues around us than we have before. Normally you would be, you know, going crazy over work and other things and just send money, or, you know, you get onto a call. But now you see the suffering right there, and people are actually saying, what are you going to do about it? And people are actually doing things. And I've seen so many people come up and get out of their comfort zones and actually start up things that are helping the communities they live in. And it's been such a joy, such an honor to be part of. And I feel like now I don't think of Uganda alone. I feel like we can do more than just Uganda. We can take whatever we do as Africans doing work together and just take it on and take it out of here and take it everywhere into, Zambia and everywhere else. So it's been a very tough time. It's been a very telling time, but also it's brought us closer, the pandemic. And I'm very grateful that we've had that as as an outcome of the pandemic.
Thank you. So tough times that people were forced out of their comfort zones, which birthed new communities, but also allowed people to come closer within already existing communities. All right, we'll come over to you, Julie. Curious to know, the Mastercard Foundation invests heavily in, Africa and its youth. Has the pandemic shifted your priorities in how you invest in Africa and its youth?
Thank you so much. Thank you for the question. Thank you for the discussions. I think really, really honored to be here. Just before I jump into answering that question and almost delivering the keynote in that answer, allow me to just say this. I myself am an African woman. I really resonate with your message, though, about, you have this Zambian passport. I have a Kenyan passport, but very much feel the Pan-African Ubuntu spirit. So I love this conversation. And I want to say, while coming at it from an organizational perspective, I also come at this from a perspective as a Pan-Africanist and an Afro-optimist and as an African woman and mother. So I think all of that is important. And so jumping in to really answer that, I'll keep my remarks brief, but try to walk through how the foundation has been navigating this space, what we have been learning in these interesting times, and then maybe end with a personal note that I think connects to what Daktari and Linda have also spoken of. Let me take a step back and just share some context about Mastercard Foundation that I think is always important for everybody to understand. So the Mastercard Foundation was established in 2006 through a gift from Mastercard Incorporated at the time of their IPO. Mastercard did something really unprecedented and decided to set up a foundation in its name, but absolutely completely independent. And that's why it really was a gift to the world. And so we have our own board of directors and management, and we are a fully independent organization. Important to understand the distinction between Mastercard and Mastercard Foundation. Our founding objective was to deepen financial inclusion by increasing access to financial services. Now, in 2009, our board of directors and our CEO made an important decision. It was a defining decision for the foundation's work, and it was to center our work primarily in one geography, in Africa. Now, a decade later, in 2018, so much had been established. We had set up the Scholars Program, done a raft of work around financial inclusion, and we started to ask ourselves, how do we dive even deeper into this, even more strategically? And so in 2018, the foundation doubled down on its commitment through the launch of a strategy called the Young Africa Works strategy. We unified our work now around the issue of young people in Africa and lack of opportunity. We set a bold target of enabling 30 million young people to access dignified and fulfilling work by 2030, with a focus 70% on young women. Now that's important. And part of us being in this room with you is to introduce our mission, our vision, our learnings, but also I'm keen to hear from you about what we should know and how we should work, because you are the center really of our work. So I think really important to say that. Now, we've established and done a lot. You may know of us in different spaces, and for sure, a lot of people have heard about our Scholars Program. I want to just share a number with you. To date, we have over 47,000 young Africans who have gone through our Scholars Program. We're going to double that number and do much, much more. And we continue to learn and to grow. And then, of course, 2020 happened, COVID hit, and all the work we had done, the plans we had done, we had to start to reimagine how we move forward, how we structure our work to really have impact in environments facing huge challenges, new challenges through COVID. So we have launched in 2020 a program called the MasterCard Foundation COVID-19 Recovery and Resilience Program. We've done a raft of work. We started work with the Africa CDC, and I'm going to come to more on that in a moment. And we went deep into our teams at country level to further understand what were they hearing from communities? What do we need to rethink? How can we be agile? And this is an ongoing process. Now, this year, we're building on the response of the COVID-19 Recovery and Resilience Program. We launched the Saving Lives and Livelihoods Initiative with the Africa CDC, a $1.5 billion partnership to achieve the following. Number one, to purchase vaccines for more than 65 million people across the continent. Our first batch of close to 1 million, actually just over 900,000 vaccines landed in Kenya earlier this week, and we have more landing across other African countries. Second, we're looking to enable vaccinations for millions more by investing in the logistics of vaccine delivery and administration. And Daktari, I heard you say, the burnout is happening for those who are working, at the front lines of healthcare. There's extra load. We're building the science. We so recognize this and asked ourselves, how can we do more? How can we help? And of course, using the mandated body on the African continent, the Africa CDC, and I'll come back to that in just a moment. Third, we're looking to lay the groundwork for vaccine manufacturing in Africa through a focus on workforce development. So Africa must be able to stand on her own. And in this era, around these public health challenges, we must be able to manufacture our own vaccines, and we can't be left behind. And building that human capital for this is where we are centering ourselves. So strengthening the Africa CDC's capacity is our fourth pillar to oversee this historic vaccination exercise and address future outbreaks. Now, I want to speak to how we are building resilience in a different approach to work, right? A lot of people came to us and said, why would you not have put these funds into COVAX, right? This is a mechanism the world has set up. Why not COVAX? And we said, if we are doing work in Africa, we have to build African capacity, African institutions to meet the challenges of the African continent, period. And I think in 2021, early 2021, when vaccines started to land in countries and it became clear Africa was going to be left out, this was why this approach was all the more important. And so maybe a learning here comes back to African capacity, understanding our own work, understanding our own contributions. Linda just spoke to the fact that, we've been looking to others to help, but we ourselves have been helping our own people, our own communities. We don't document it, but we do it. How do we better recognize that? What is the mindset shift required to build the confidence and then to strengthen our African capacity, our African institutions? Now, as we look forward, there's a lot that we need to learn, and we need to learn it together. I think for me, as an individual, it is about understanding we must look after ourselves to be able to look after our communities, our families, and I think again, rethinking and reframing how we work, allowing ourselves to not look at the norm, 9-to-5 office job, which for so many Africans, there were simply young people locked out of this, is to ask ourselves, what is needed and how do we enable a new way of working, a new way of producing, a new way of collaborating, a new way of building communities. Let's break with the systems that many of them were set up by the colonials who came in, and ask ourselves, what do our communities really need, even in our education systems? And I think this is an opportunity for us to really reframe. I think Daktari said communities are made up of individuals, of people who are, it's humans. We must build individual resilience to build strong community resilience. I want to come back to center it at that and say, we all also need to pay attention to wellness. And this is becoming a big issue, especially for young people, but right across the board as well. If we can ensure that we as individuals are well and whole, we can then ensure our families are well and whole. and we can ensure our communities are well and whole. How do we do this? My final word before I come back to you is that we are interconnected, Nkatia. We are all interconnected. The world is interconnected. And when we didn't give Africa enough vaccines, you start to see people panicking that variants are coming out. Although I'm not sure if they're coming from Africa or just being discovered here. I'm not a scientist, but we are interconnected. We must be well to ensure others are well. We must work to listen, hear each other, understand what is required, reframe our thinking, start to be able to challenge the norms of the past. It does take a lot of work to do these things, but we must do them. And then the final thing is COVID is still with us. Just a message: continue to take care of yourself, protect your family, protect your community. I look forward to the discussion. I've talked too much, and so come back straight to you in the panel. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Julie. You touched on a lot of pertinent points, but the common thread seems to be, even with Prosper, Linda, is that there's this talk of reimagining, rethinking, reframing, building on your individual resilience, because it starts with you before it spills over into the community. And also the idea of building, firstly, our capacity, and then building on once we build our capacity, gaining the confidence. After we gain the confidence, then building on the capacity of our African institutions to then be able to, create African solutions. So, I'll come back to you, Prosper. Speaking about public health, I'm curious to know, with COVID, something we always said in Zambia, whenever we had daily updates from the Minister of Health. But then, they'll give out these startling numbers of, cases rising, deaths, unfortunately. And then we'll always be reminded, but guys, there's other diseases. There's other very deadly diseases Zambians and, Africans are dying from every day. So I'm curious to know, Prosper, in the midst of a pandemic where you have competing needs, or you have COVID-19 is right up there, it's raging, and you also have limited resources, limited staff, and you also have other patients with other needs, with very apparent needs. How do you in the healthcare profession and being at the front line ensure that you are still able to serve your community in the face of, you have this raging pandemic, but there's these other needs and you have limited resources? How are you able to balance that out and ensure that you're still able to serve your community? Now, I want you to compare, before the pandemic, you didn't have a raging pandemic, and now you have a raging pandemic. How are you able to serve your community?
Thank you, Kanche. I think that was that's a very good question you asked. And before the pandemic, we still had, I think, maternal mortality was high, with about 16 mothers dying every day due to complications of pregnancy. We had children who are malnourished, we had sicklers sickle cell patients who didn't have access to medicines. So I think these challenges of our health, our healthcare system have been around. And these range from actually lack of access to care, the quality of care, if you actually get care, and how can we for example, you asked a very important question. Patients, for example, who are diabetic. These are clients who have chronic diseases. Their needs are not just for one day. They're on lifelong medication. HIV patients, they're on lifelong medication. Sicklers, they're on lifelong medication. So these were present within us. So with the pandemic, I think they took a hit. Personally, mothers were giving birth, along the way because there was no ambulance in the first 2 or 3 months of lockdown. because all the focus was on COVID-19. Babies missed their vaccination days. So it was really sad that it took a hit as healthcare providers. So we had to triage and say, well, according to the risk of the person or to the health of the person, who is going to die first? So we had to triage and say for COVID patients who require ICU, number one priority. Those who have, for example, mothers who are due for delivery, these we actually had to, we had to put new protocols. So we have PPE when we're maybe doing cesarean sections, but we also had to triage them. Then chronic patients who are on chronic care, HIV, diabetes, it was actually a very good time for innovation to thrive. So I have a colleague who's also, I think, he's a fellow, Dr. Martin. So they had patients who are HIV patients. So what they did, patients who wouldn't move to actually access medication. So what they did was partner with safe mobility companies, borders to deliver medicines from, the hospital to people's homes. So I actually saw the rise of technology, the rise of telemedicine during the pandemic, because we had to first prioritize those who needed the care and then move to those who could actually access care later on. So for me as a healthcare innovator, I was pretty very much excited. Telemedicine, home-based care was flourishing, and people, I think, when you talk about, you mentioned something about reimagining. We have adopted a lot of systems and functions that don't work for us, that don't work for young people, and I think it's high time we started reimagining. So COVID gave us this shock, and we're able to start thinking, what is the new way we could actually be more efficient, but still deliver healthcare. So for me, those are some of the learning points I got from the pandemic.
Thank you. Before we get to that reimagining conversation, because that's how I'd like us to close out, I really want to dig into resilience. And you spoke earlier about the importance of, that you had set up mental health stations within the wards and all that, as a healthcare professional. So Linda, I'd like to know, what resilient tools have you had to lean into, whether personally or, for the organization at organizational level? What resilient tools have you called on in the last 2 years to enable that you just survive this period?
Thank you. What has happened is that we have had to be vulnerable as a people. We've been able to, we've embraced truth before, more than ever before, because there's no way you're going to handle something that you've never handled before without being honest about where you are as a person. And so mental health definitely has been such a big issue, because so many people, if you have dependents and you have people looking up to you to fulfill some needs of theirs, and when you're in that position and you're looking after people, they don't expect that anything should be happening to you. You should be giving to them. And now things are happening to you as well, and you have to explain them. And so how I have managed to cope actually has been to completely open myself up and say, guys, let's be vulnerable here and let's sit together and let's speak the truth to each other and just find solutions together. And so it has been such an honor to sit with like-minded people and just say, this is what it is. This is what we have and how we're going to use it. And people have actually realized that you don't have to put up a brave front and, be the know-it-all and do things on your own. And now we have more honest conversations, more honest partnerships, and people actually tapping into the spaces they're leading and saying, listen, guys, I'm in charge here, but I also don't know, just like the pandemic, we don't know what is happening. So you just sit there and say, let's talk about this, what's happening. So I have seen more heart, more more truth, more connectedness. And it's been such an eye-opener, such a learning point, and I can't be more grateful for it. It's been a very phenomenal time.
Vulnerability and openness as a resilient tool. That's the first I've heard, and I love it. Julie, will come to you. What specific resilient tools have you called on, whether in your personal capacity or as an organization? And, as you said earlier, I think it starts personally first. So what tools have you called upon to help you be resilient in this time?
Thanks. At a personal level, it was, first of all, trying to understand context, gathering as much information as you can for practical, pragmatic decision making. This is critical, right? I think strength and fortitude are critical, and I think strategic thinking. So resilience for me is a combination of all these things, of the willingness to learn and understand how you need to adapt, the strength and the fortitude to do the things that you need to do, whether it's disrupting the norms or adjusting things radically, and then having the strategic foresight and thinking to make decisions moving forward. So a practical level, that meant for the family, in fact, before the schools sent children home, I had, for the two of mine who are in boarding school, I had said, guys, it was a Thursday. I said, guys, something's happening. It's serious. Come home. We're picking you up. They were dismayed, of course, didn't want to leave. And it was on the Saturday that government announced on this side, school closures, everybody head home. But I had made a decision. I'll battle it out with the administrators later, but from everything I could see, and it was more of that kind of thing. And then how do now, once they get home, how do they learn? How do you continue the process, for them of learning, etc. At institutional level, I want to just talk a little bit about what AVAT did. So the African Vaccine Acquisition Trust that was set up by the African Union has been instrumental for this continent, and I think is an example and should be a case study in universities in Africa and the world about resilience. We're the only continent that actually marshaled itself, went to sit at the table with vaccine manufacturers, negotiated discount rates for purchase. We were not in those rooms begging for vaccines. We were saying, yes, we'll buy them, but we want to buy them at discounted rates because we're bringing the size of the African continent as opposed to negotiating per country. And I think just let's take a moment and even just think about that as an example of when Africa holds together, turns up into rooms together and says, we're marshalling. And if you want to access and you want us to buy, we're doing it together. And therefore we can negotiate. We want to talk about better rates. We want to talk about better planning, better treatment. And this in itself, I think for me, is an incredible sign of resilience. We need to see more of that. Of course, the role the Africa CDC is playing, the adjustment it's making, the rollouts across the continent, the discussions and negotiations on the ground, and collaborations with ministries of health. All of this is incredible resilience. And then finally, just to end, Dr. Prosper, I think, mentioned and talked about the work around Ebola. Africa has dealt with some difficult things before as well. We have, and we've had to address these challenges. We are resilient. Our communities are resilient, and there's a lot to look back into our people, our women, organizations, our elders, and even our young people who every single day are figuring out ways to survive, right? We are incredibly resilient. Let me finish on that, this answer on that note and come back to you.
Thank you, Julie. Indeed, we are resilient. And I think something that's been echoed in the room is that if we're looking for solutions, we actually have them. We have them within ourselves. We have what it takes. Julie, just one more question. I'm curious to know, based on the fact that we are a resilient continent, and we've shown that in the way we rallied at the table, how can we move from not only building, because the conversation is around building resilience, but I'd like to know your thoughts around how do we not only build, but how can we sustain resilience? Because resilience, as I see it, is not an on and off button. It's a muscle that must be constantly massaged and used, so it's stronger and stronger and stronger. So how can we not only build on resilience, but actually sustain it?
Wow, that's a brilliant question. That's a really brilliant question. Maybe that's where our gap has been, because it's recognizing we are resilient. Then where's the challenge? What are the dots we need to connect to really build and get to the next level of growth and development, etc.? I think the answer to that is systems, institutions, documentation of processes, etc. And comes back to Lucy's point of, we keep asking for help from outside, and when you look inside, we actually are the greatest supporters of ourselves, right? And within, even just within, we can marshal ourselves in incredible ways. However, how are we building the institutional support? How are we documenting the learnings and the processes that build, that build on this? And I think that is why when we ask ourselves, what do we need to do next? Trust and mindset change is critical. We've been very cynical, sometimes rightly so, about our systems and our institutions and our processes. But we must get it right. We must get them right. And if it's not us, who's going to do it, right? So we've got to marshal ourselves together, do the right things to build strong institutions that have strong processes, strong institutional memory, good documentation of learnings and journeys, setting up of systems moving forward. I think this is where we build sustenance around the whole idea of resilience.
Really great. Thank you, Julie. Linda, what are your thoughts? How do we sustain resilience in our personal lives, in our institutions, in our communities?
What more can I say after Julie? I think what she says is true. I think more than that, I think we need to get angry as a people. We need to get angry and refuse the mediocre leadership that we've had before. If you live in a space where there's mediocre leadership, you need to get angry and refuse it. I think we need to stand up and say, listen, we can do this. We know we are resilient. We know we can do things, but we need to get angry and get up and do things. And so once we get up and do these things, then there's no stopping us. If we actually ask for accountability from the people who are supposed to be doing the things and say, if you're not doing it, I will do it. I am a citizen, but I am filling up the gap that a government body should be, doing, then it says something. And if it's sin and the citizens are actually saying, no, we're done, we're doing this on our own, I guess then we're actually moving forward. That's what I think.
And Doc?
Thank you. I think I'll agree with what Julie said. I think talking about institutions, systems thinking, I think those are things that we largely ignore. We live in the moment. This happened, and then another thing happens, and we don't draw the connection. So I feel like that needs to happen. I want to add on what Linda said. We need to channel our anger. We just don't need to get angry because we can blow up. There's a lot of things to be angry about, especially in Africa. If you just choose a day to get angry, you'll be, I think you might be taken in. So I think we need to channel that anger into action and making sure that that leads me to the third thing, imagining probably new communities around our areas of focus or the solutions we have seen that are very pertinent, and we need to build, we need to solve them. We need not solutions, yes, to the problems that we have. And we need to focus on those that actually have the biggest magnitude. So I think for me, those are the ways we should actually, we can build our resilience, but also sustain it. Then the other thing before to sustain our resilience is about collaboration and partnerships. I think I have to say that again, collaboration and partnerships. When Hashim was here, he was talking about how our problems are very complex. And when you think about it, I have me who's been maternal health, you'll be first. For example, if a mother has to deliver in a hospital, they have to, first of all, anything can go wrong, from making the decision to leave home to the hospital, getting the means to get to hospital for delivery, and actually finding a qualified health worker to actually work on this mother. So when you think about it, if you're trying to just have that good one outcome, that is saving the mother, there are a lot of things that come into the way. So it's really complex, but I think when you're setting out, no one tells you the things are complex. It's only when you're in the mud and you are trying to change something that you actually discover they are. So I think partnerships and collaborating, talking to each other, connecting with each other, I think is a way to go to sustain our resilience.
Speaking about collaboration and partnerships, I think often when we speak about the pandemic, a lot that's discussed is what we've lost, But I'm curious to know, and Prosper, since you got us started on this, you can start. I'm curious to know what collaborations and partnerships have been birthed in the pandemic that you didn't envision before the pandemic and have surprised you. They've come out of the pandemic.
Well, as my organization, we really we didn't know what was coming our way. I looked into my accounts. I'm like, our accounts. I was like, I don't know. This pandemic is here for us. It's taking us. But I think we had to reinvent ourselves. We had to think of new business models. And when we thought of them like this, that's when we started talking to networks. Like I hit people. I'm like, we have this. We're trying this new thing, but we need funding around it. And I can tell you, it was through a friend that I was notified of an opportunity, and we were working with JICA currently to extend our community healthcare models. Previously worked with Johnson & Johnson for our to build our business and scale. So it should be in us. We shouldn't fear to dream and say, this has happened. This is a new way we should do things. I think the moment you take that action and you reach out to your community or to your ecosystem, I'm telling you, things will happen. So for me, those are some of the partnerships that came through, and more are actually coming as well for the work we are doing, and we are very grateful.
And yourself, Julie, any collaborations and partnerships that came out of the pandemic that maybe you possibly didn't envision before the pandemic?
Yes, absolutely. But before I go to that, let me just reiterate, Linda and Daktari spoke about anger. Daktari said, it needs to be targeted or whatever. I wanted to just share an African quote that says, no matter how hot your anger is, it cannot cook yams. I'll leave you with that one. Think about it a little bit. I think strategic thinking is so important. On the collaborations question, yes, of course. We had been very big in financial access, in education, etc. We had never taken a step into health, and this is as the MasterCard Foundation. So this big bold step, the biggest partnership we've ever announced in our time of existence, was made this year with the Africa CDC. And so, yes, absolutely, boldly going into saying that we can do more in spaces that are non-traditional for us, but where we're willing to learn, where we want to walk the journey with those who understand and who are placed to address these issues. So yes, absolutely. And then let me just go to a personal thought. Linda said she's a dreamer. I'm a dreamer too. And this world where you go into a doctor's office, first of all, so few people have access to doctors' offices, hospitals, clinics, etc. But you get to a doctor's office, you sit there for hours, it's just, and it might be similar contexts in our different countries. This year, something interesting happened where my little one was not well, called a clinic, got referred to a doctor close by. Guy turns up on a bike. What do you call it where you are? We call them, it's a boda moto bike. Yes, a boda or a moto. Guy turns up, right? You actually think he's the boda guy. He's casual, comes off, has a backpack, takes everything out, and he's a doctor. examines my son, literally tells him what it is, does a prescription, and comes back 2 days later for a follow-up check. I mean, this for me was mind-blowing. And so this is where we're saying, what is resilience? It's asking yourself, why must you carry yourself to a doctor's office? You know, why not within our ecosystems, within our community? You can imagine the number of women, we know the numbers at local level, who don't ever get to access a clinic. They can't. So empowering and whether it's the, you know, the midwives or clinicians on the ground to address the needs of specific communities, very well trained on the more common things that come across, they can refer forward for others. But this is where I think that collaboration, that active listening to each other, saying to people, what do you need? Saying to communities, what do you need? And then modeling responses that work for African communities. You can see I could go on and on, so I'll keep quiet, but I thought I would just inject that into the discussion.
Thank you so much, Julie. In the spirit of dreaming, we're running out of time, so I would like to challenge all three panelists. So start with you, Linda. Can you inspire us to dream? Can you invite us to dream, call us higher? So I'd like you to just give, you know, in a minute, your 2 cents of how we can reimagine, rethink, and reframe so that we can thrive moving forward. Over to you.
I think that there's nothing more I can say in a space like this where everybody is trying to do their best to you know, to add their voice and their heart to the matters that, you know, the matters that are bothering us as Africans, and they're trying to reimagine spaces and to do things. And all I can say perhaps is that we need to continue to look at each other and hold up each other and say, what do you need? If you can help someone and empower them, why not do that? And just work together, collaborate, and find solutions together. I think that's all I could say.
Well, thank you, Linda. And Doc, challenge us. How can we reimagine, rethink, and reframe as we move forward?
Thank you, Katya. I think it's a very, when you ask that, it's a very, it depends on who you're asking. If you ask me what I see probably in the next 5 years, I think I can tell you it can be different if I act differently. So if you ask someone, maybe a girl who is out of school right now, and you ask her where she's seeing the next 5 years, it can be, it's not a good picture to have, to be honest. So the biggest thing that we have is our ability to believe, first of all, in our ability to change the narrative, to build the future that we want, to imagine new communities that we can support, that we can thrive in. I think for me, that is core. So if you don't have that belief, first of all, I think you're not going anywhere. Then two, I think we are glad we're in platforms and spaces where what we have is a space that has enabled us to thrive regardless of our abilities. I think it's now on us to create, to be the leadership, to build all these communities, but also provide leadership and direction. So I could say there's a lot of work to be done. I don't want to sell false hope and say the future is here, Africa is the future and all that. As you do that, it comes with a lot of action to back it up. So for me, those are my submissions.
Thank you. And over to you, Julie, last but not least. How can we reimagine, reframe, and refocus for the future?
Yeah, you know, the future is what the future is, but we are Africa, and Africa was our past, is our present, and is our future too, right? So I think that context of we're here, we just have to make it work. And I'm going to just share 2 words that I think take us forward in the right way. Be kind. Be kind. If you just be kind in the way you engage with other stakeholders, in the way kind to yourself, kind to your community. Start to ask yourself, how can we do better? Does this really work? I think kindness is underrated, it's underestimated. And if we put kindness front and center, we will be looking to solve each other's solutions. We will be human. We will hopefully drop the cynicism and say, I can make a difference. Forget all the things that give me a headache. Let me just do my part and let me be kind to the people around me. I think that mindset shift starts to allow us to truly love ourselves and to love each other and takes us to a new place. I hope that makes sense.
Yes, it does. Be kind. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we've come to the end of our panel discussion. What the pandemic has taught us about the changing nature of imagined communities and building resilience. I'd like to give a big thanks to our panelists, our esteemed panelists. So we were joined by Linda Umutesi, founder of the Future Generations Trust. Thank you, Linda. Big hand, please. We were also joined by Dr. Prosper Ahimbisiwe. Big hand, please, a medical doctor. And of course, big thanks to Julie Gichuru, who's joining us all the way from Nairobi, Kenya, virtually. And she's the Chief Public Affairs and Communications Officer at the MasterCard Foundation. At that note, I'd like to end, and just remember, be kind. Thank you. Okay. For those joining us virtually, I will be back in 2 hours at break off for lunch, and yeah, see you then.